Number 290 Heavy, contact departure 119.2, good night.
119.2, 290 Heavy. Good night.
Welcome to the Aeropedia podcast. I'm Ashwin.
And I'm Peter. We're really excited to have you on board with us today.
So the Aeropedia podcast is an easy listening podcast focusing on a wide range of aviation topics that will appeal to avid travelers, curious minds, budding aviation enthusiasts, young professionals, even students thinking about careers in aviation, and obviously the longtime av geeks. In each episode, we will cover a specific topic within this exciting industry and speak to a guest about their subject matter expertise in that area. So guests will talk about the skills required along their career ladder, key topics in their cool professions, and some behind-the-scenes stories.
Each guest also will be able to compete in our exclusive Aeropedia podcast Trivia Challenge, hoping to be crowned the next ultimate av geek. Our Trivia Challenge is also a fun way to learn something new about the industry. So let's dive into our topic for today. Welcome. Today's topic is aircraft product marketing. We have the pleasure of having Rodrigo Lezama with us. Rodrigo is a wide-body marketing director at Airbus Commercial Aircraft. He contributes to the product positioning and market development strategies for Airbus's wide-body product line. Rodrigo has been with Airbus since 2018. Prior to Airbus, Rodrigo held positions at Bombardier, CAE, and General Electric. Rodrigo has a bachelor's in aviation management and master's in aerospace engineering from McGill University. So Ashwin, have you seen the latest jumbo jet ad?
You know, Peter, I've always wondered how folks position these in the market. So let's do this.
Let's learn more.
So Rodrigo, welcome to the podcast. So just for our listeners, just give us a brief background about, your experience and expertise within aviation.
Yeah, thank you, Ashwin. So first of all, Ashwin, Peter, thank you for having me joining this podcast. It's really exciting. So my name is Rodrigo Lezama. I'm currently working for Airbus. I do marketing for Widebodies. In particular, I take care of what we call market development within the overall product marketing department. And yeah, so I've been doing marketing for different aircraft segments for, I would say, a little over 8 years. And my combined experience in aviation is over 15 years. I've worked for engine manufacturers. I've done engineering, integration, but really the core of my career as of late, it's marketing. And I've had the opportunity to do it for business jets, regional jets, both turboprops and jets, single aisles, and well, as of most recently, wide body marketing.
Yeah, so just high level, if you could explain to us, right, how are airplanes in general, how are they marketed to customers? What goes into this process?
So yeah, as you can imagine, Ashwin, you've seen it when we used to work together. Marketing an aircraft is a very complex process, and I think the something that's interesting and important in the whole cycle of marketing and selling an aircraft is that it's a continuous process, right? I mean, it's not something that you start and end with something. I mean, yeah, that's the ultimate objective, but then whatever the outcome of your sales campaign is, you will still fit that again into the loop. So what goes into marketing, it's really at the beginning, it's understanding the market, right? It might be obvious, but sometimes it isn't, because you need to understand what customers want, what do they need, what are the characteristics they're looking in a product, in this case, aircraft. And once you do understand your market and what are the products that you're trying to sell, then the influencing part starts. And by influencing, what I mean is creating a story, is having the right storytelling of, look, this is how we see the market. This is how we see our products fitting into that market and our competitors as well, because there's always going to be a competitive element associated to it, right? So this is how we position ourselves, and this is the value that we see our aircraft providing to the customers. So this is the storytelling part, the way, well, I mean, what we call typically the storytelling, and what we call the influencing, right? Because even if the airlines are not necessarily asking you to make them a proposal, they may not even know you, right? I mean, depending on the size of the company, depending on the product, they may even not know that you're actively promoting an aircraft. So you will start influencing the different actors, and not just the ultimate customer, but the stakeholders, to engage them into what you want to sell. You want to engage suppliers, you want to engage investors, you want to engage appraisers, lessors, airlines, of course, on the influencing phase. And then you go into the active campaign mode, right? When an airline issues a call for tender, what we typically call RFI or RFP, request for information or request for proposal, that's really when, by then, hopefully, if we did our jobs right at the influencing phase, they would already have an idea of certain things that maybe they were not thinking about, but because of your storytelling on, what should they be focusing on? The economics, the cabin experience, the range, etc. By the time they issue a call for tender on a specific product they need, they already have in mind, well, I kind of need an aircraft this size on this seat range that can give me this, these performance levels, etc. And that's really when you start into the active campaign mode, by issuing a proposal and going and presenting it to them. And then, of course, that goes fully into commercial negotiations, contracts, etc. And then the feeding, the closed loop of it is that the outcome of that campaign, I mean, you will have iterations, of course, in the negotiations, as anything in life, but then those ultimate lessons that you learn, if you win the campaign, why did you win it? If you lost it, why did you lose it? Was it because you needed more on the development of the product, right? And maybe from that, you will learn on this campaign and that other campaign and this other campaign that the market is actually looking for more seats, more range, a new type of connectivity at the cabin level. So you feed that, and the other role of marketing is saying, look, what the customer told us is this, and this is how we need to develop the product. And that is transferred into another big important function of the marketing teams, which is doing the internal liaison with other areas of the company, such as programs and engineering, to develop and shape the strategy of the future products.
That's really interesting, Rodrigo. Thanks for sharing that whole concept. When you're working with a potential customer and you're saying you get feedback and to help develop the airplane further, do you, for our listeners, are there more things that happen to be in the cabin, like amenities or seat capacity, or are there more things that typically are in the performance of the airplane, or is it really an even split between that when you hear feedback from operators? Can you maybe just share more about that?
Yeah, sure. I think, as you said, it is really even across all these elements. I would say, for example, when it comes to cabin, right? I mean, cabin specifically, there's many elements to the cabin, of course, and one important element are the seats, right? For example, or the IFE, the in-flight entertainment. These type of elements in an airplane are usually furnished by outside companies, right? What we call BFE, buyer furnished equipment, which means once an operator buys an airplane, they will decide who's going to supply the specific seats they need. And of course, we, as aircraft manufacturers, need to be able to integrate those developments and certify them and make sure that they will be able to be installed in our aircraft. All that to say, yes, there's some feedback on maybe we would like to have more options. And by options, they mean more certified seat suppliers, to give you an example, on your platform. Because if today I tell you, well, on my aircraft, you can only install A or B, you could potentially install C, but that's going to take us time to establish a relationship. It might take you time. So that's part of the feedback. Maybe some of the feedback could be not so much about a specific seat, but really about more having options and establish relationships already with lead suppliers on the cabin aspect, for example. And then at the aircraft level, from my personal experience, I can tell you that typically airlines will ask for, they'll have a wish list and they will shoot for the moon, and they will like to reduce maintenance cost. They would like to have aircraft that can fly longer, that can have more, that can fly with more payload for cargo if they need cargo. That of course can have a more efficient engine. So they will always be looking for on this engine. Well, it's you've reduced by that much the fuel burn. Is that something else on the pipe? Can you reduce it even further? That right now the range of this aircraft with this configuration is this. Are you working on something else to add a couple of hundred nautical miles? So honestly, it comes from all sides, and then really part of our work is to understand really, okay, for this customer, what is it that it's going to be a significant advantage, competitive advantage for them. And then we of course take feedback from all across the customer population and feed it, and we have to have an opinion vis-a-vis our program and engineering departments to tell them, look, we'd like to develop everything. There's always a budget, right, on how much we can invest in developing our products. So we, as the voice of the customer internally to our company, we think this is the priority and maybe that one. And we see the market and the potential for that development being sold at this level. So this is all the information for you to now build a business case and kind of prioritize what developments you go ahead with.
Thanks, Rodrigo. That's very insightful. In terms of the RFP process that you mentioned, talk us through, how long does each RFI or RFP take from start to finish, right, until the airline, finally makes a decision, and what are the factors that the length of this depends upon?
Yeah, it's a good question because it really depends on the airline. It really depends on the amount of aircraft. Sometimes they're looking at aircraft that will cover a various range of operations within the airline. Typically, something that's fairly standard, I would say, is that you first receive a request for information, in which the airline is basically asking you, I just want to have more information. Like when you click get more information on a website for a car and they send you a brochure sort of thing. It's very open, very generic, not a lot of details on their side. It's like, just tell me what you have. What are your product line for this type of operations? And that, I would say, they give you an answer time. Typically, it varies from 6 to 2 months, for example, just standard times. And that's the beginning of the conversation. Then, in general, 6 months after, that's when the RFP is issued. Sometimes it could be more. Sometimes they can just issue an RFI and then nothing happens. But let's say, for the sake of the example, in January, you get an RFI, you reply it. You could expect by the summer to already have a good idea of, the RFP that's going to be issued. What's important is between the RFI and the RFP, that's one of the most critical phases for you as a marketeer to influence as much as you can. Because once the RFP is launched, the RFP will be a lot more detailed. The RFP will not be a just give me information. It will be a no. I'm looking to replace, or I'm looking to grow my operations for this segment of my market or my operations. I'm looking for an aircraft on this capacity to do this network. I would expect to have this aircraft available by these dates with this delivery stream. Is very, very, very detailed. So yeah, I would say in general, from the minute you start a campaign to the moment you could say it's closed, the deal design, it could vary roughly from a year to up to 2 years, sometimes more. Yeah.
You highlighted stakeholders earlier, and could you explain for our listeners, are there particular types of stakeholders that you engage with at different phases of that RFI and RFP process that you explained, or are they consistent stakeholders throughout? Maybe a little bit more detail there would be interesting.
Yeah, sure. So during the RFI, RFP process, you definitely engage with the various stakeholders along the way. Well, the biggest one, as you can imagine, is the engine manufacturer. In the case of aircraft that are single source of engines, you really want to have a full, how do I say this, a fully aligned approach from day one, because if your aircraft is only powered by one specific engine, manufacturer in this case, you want to be fully aligned from day one. So that's one of the biggest stakeholders, right? Because as you also know, engine is a significant element in the value of an aircraft when it comes to fuel burn, but also when it comes to the costs. The maintenance cost as a whole for an airframe is a significant part of the overall cost across its life, and engine maintenance cost is a very significant portion as well. So I would say that's one of the number one elements. But then, as I was mentioning, seat suppliers, for example, not just seat suppliers, but anything that's cabin interior suppliers. Obviously, the seats play an enormous role in this process, because if we have, for example, let's say an airline, or we want to introduce the concept of potentially a new configuration, a new for the cabin, with a specific supplier that today hasn't developed that seat for our aircraft, right? Because seat manufacturers could develop one specific seat for, let's say, 10 different aircraft, but they may not do it at the same time, or they may not certify it at the same time. So you also need to engage with them and to tell them, look, for this particular campaign, we believe your seat, and you could issue it to multiple suppliers at the same time, but you could say, for this campaign, we believe we need a new seat to be offered and to be developed. There's also other stakeholders, for example, on the services side, right? Some manufacturers will, of course, try to complement the aircraft, the sale of the aircraft, with an offer on services, because you don't only want to sell the aircraft. Sometimes you may want to add services to it. By services, concretely, I mean training services. If they need, if it's a startup, for example, you want to reassure them that the pilot that they'll hire, you can support them into the training, that the cabin crew they'll hire, that the mechanics, the technicians working on the maintenance, they will need to be trained. And last but not least, one other element of important stakeholders, particularly when it comes to the movement of aircraft, are lessors and financiers, because in many cases, airlines may not have the financing that they need to procure themselves the aircraft. So you also need to engage with lessors. So all these elements are of course important when it comes to the whole stakeholder management.
Very cool. And speaking of lessors, we will have Tony Santos coming up on the podcast in a few weeks. So we'll dive into that entire lessor and sale and leaseback topic in a few weeks. Very excited about that. So Rodrigo, when you're speaking with the customers, you mentioned that they already have a specific requirement of what capacity they need and what range they need, et cetera, right? So oftentimes, are you always competing with the amongst the same products, and if you could just list out, what are these products and that often compete with one another across different OEMs, just to give us a better idea of, at each of these kind of sub segments, right? Who's competing against who?
Okay. Yeah, so on the widebody products today, basically you have two segments, right? I mean, what we call the small and mid wide bodies and the large wide bodies. On the small mid wide bodies, on Airbus, you have the 330neo primarily, with two variants, the 330-800 and the 330-900, which, roughly speaking, you can say these are 300-seaters. And on wide bodies, every time somebody tells you a capacity, you got to take it with a pinch of salt and a number of assumptions, because, as you know, configurations could vary tremendously if you decide to include a business class, first class, all economy. But typically, industry-wide, small and mid wide bodies are considered to be 300-seater-ish. On the Boeing side, the competing products to the 330neo are primarily the 787-8 and the 787-9. Then on the large wide bodies, on the Airbus side, you have the A350, the 900 and the 1000, which in our view, these are 350 plus seaters, with the 1000 being a 400-seater, more or less. And then on the Boeing side, you have the 787-10 and the 777X, which is still in development. It hasn't entered service yet. So that's roughly the positioning today.
So Rodrigo, when new airplanes, and I'd say especially wide bodies, are introduced to the market, you always see these grandiose visions of what it could be, right? That there's like 747, I remember, was the lounge that was going to be in the upper deck, which some airlines implemented and not. In the A380, there was, hot tubs were said to maybe be put in, and shopping centers and all these different things. Some come to fruition, some don't. But, where do these ideas typically come from? Is it from the airlines themselves, or is it the manufacturers trying to just get excitement around a new launch? Could you maybe explain a little more about that?
Well, I think I would say it's a bit of both, of course, but typically, when we when we try to promote our products, right? I mean, we do have mock-ups, and we're always constantly imagining different things. And of course, our objective is not to say to airlines, generally speaking, very upstream when we're launching and imagining new things. It's not to tell them, oh, this is what you should put for your aircraft, because there's so many business models, so many different airlines. We really just try to imagine and innovate and project ourselves into what is capable. For us, the aircraft itself, the cabin, it's a canvas. And what we want to show is the possibilities.
Wow, pretty cool. Yeah, you can just imagine the kinds of, interesting and weird lists of things that airlines may come up with someday, right? As these aircraft get more innovative and larger, right? So you've also, throughout your career, you've basically focused on business aviation. You focused on, the single aisle market or the narrow body market, whatever you want to call it. And then now you focused on the wide bodies, right? I'm sure you've seen different sets of customers across each of these segments, different market dynamics. Could you walk us through how do the products and the markets and the entire customer base differ between the business jets, the narrow bodies, and the wide bodies?
Yeah, sure. On the business jet market, as you can imagine, it's a very, very different world. Traditionally, it's a market where your ultimate customer is a high net worth individual, or a corporation sometimes. And there's a couple of elements to that, because from an aircraft requirement point of view, generally speaking, the economics of the airplane take a secondary role, right? In many cases, these high net worth individuals, they're pilots themselves. So even if they're not going to be piloting their private jet, they do know about, they're very knowledgeable about the product, about, as I mentioned, many of them are pilots themselves. So cockpit and all the elements that could, increase situational awareness for the cockpit and increase connectivity, they become very relevant. I can tell you the cockpit is a very important selling element in many, in business jets. Something you really, really focus about is, the distances of the runways you can land in, right? Because you're not going to fly to LaGuardia or Newark, right? You're going to fly to Teterboro. You're not going to fly to Denver. You're going to fly to Aspen, which typically are challenging airports. So the performance of the aircraft, or this element of the performance, is very critical. How fast can you climb so that you can fly higher, and then you can fly faster? And how many minutes can I win in a mission? And even if it's not that much, there's an element of pride in having an aircraft that flies faster, that can fly farther, that has the latest technologies. And as I was mentioning, perhaps the economics of it take a secondary role. And ultimately, you're dealing with the decision maker one-to-one, right? I mean, that's very unique element of aviation, where very rarely you get the opportunity to actually talk to the person who's gonna take the money out of his pocket and be like, okay, here it is. Then on the narrow body market, the single aisles, passing a bit by, doing a bit the bridge with the regional aircraft, well, is by far the most popular segment in terms of number of operators and number of airlines, right? And then the particularity is that you can encounter very, very small operators where they really need your help and your expertise as a company, because sometimes they don't have the manpower to run certain evaluations or to optimize their fleet. Sometimes our airlines that maybe have been there for 20 years, but that haven't really, had the opportunity to look at, are we doing our operations efficiently? Can we do them differently? So you go from not only selling an aircraft, but maybe even providing a sort of consulting service while trying to promote your aircraft. And that I find very, very interesting as well. And then on the other spectrum of that market, you have airlines putting orders for 200, 300 airplanes at once, where of course, the economics and how you squeeze every cent of profitability out of the aircraft is, it's of the utmost importance, because if you're gonna buy 500 of them and you can show that you're getting a 2 million advantage per aircraft, then suddenly you get $1 billion in advantage. So it's a very diverse, you really touch every single region of the world. And then the wide body, and something that was really eye-opening for me, is that cabin, the complexity of a cabin customization, I think it raises exponentially, right? Because you go from maybe having a single class configuration or a dual class to now having 3, maybe 4 classes, and different abreast configurations. You can do 8 abreast, 9 abreast, 10 abreast. You have a lot more seat suppliers. And of course, a wide body when it comes to the airlines you're dealing with. Again, you have the big airlines who are very sophisticated, but you also have the small airlines for which a wide body could really be, some countries, some small nations are banking a good part of the nation's budget on buying one airplane, because you really get into a whole new level of operational constraints, operational costs, if very expensive aircraft, and you really need to get it all sorted out. Like, these are not easy aircraft to deal with if you don't have the experience. So, but of course, the number of airlines is a lot more reduced, and you do have your target. But nevertheless, you always find the smaller airlines that, as well, they need your support. So I don't know if I was clear, but it really showed me that, you know, you really touch on the spectrum of the of the industry that's extremely varied.
Yeah, absolutely. Very insightful, Rodrigo. I'm sure we can talk for hours about this stuff, right? So interesting and intriguing. But we'll move on to kind of the next section, which is like a rapid fire round. Quick
Okay.
questions, quick answers. So the first question I had for you is, now that we understand, you know, where you've come from, what you're doing, etc., what do you think is one hard skill and one soft skill that's required to succeed in your role?
I think one hard skill is being, it's, analytical skills. We deal with a lot of information. More and more, you get access to tons and tons of databases. So I think having good analytical skills is critical, because you need to be able to, look at patterns, look at these, analyze data, and to really, consolidate and be concise and be, get the number that's gonna help you tell your story. And then on the soft skill, I would say it's a bit of a mix between storytelling and communication skills, right? Because if going back to the analytical, you have tons of data, but you may have 5 minutes, 10 minutes to convey a message. So you really need to be, punchy, snappy into, this is what you need to know. This is what I like you to understand. And so for me, communication skills and a bit of this storytelling creativity, if you wish.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. And very important to succeed in your role. What part of aviation do you feel is least understood or misunderstood by the general public? And what can the general public do to learn more about that piece?
That's a good question. I think one of the most important things people may not fully appreciate is how difficult the airline business is when it comes to generating profit. I believe that people may have this misconception that airlines make a lot of money, right? Because when you want to buy a price ticket, every time you want to buy it, it's more expensive than the last time you did. The reality, just to roughly put people into perspective, is that historically speaking, the airline industry was always at a loss. And it's only maybe for the past, I want to say 20 years, where the airline industry as a whole, we're talking worldwide, the airline industry has started to post profits. And then because of the cyclical nature, which is another element they may not know about, the aviation industry is extremely cyclical, right? So we started as an industry to post profits around 2006, like decent profits, then boom, financial crisis, then we recovered, then boom, COVID. And so just to get people in, to give to relativize how much profit or how little profit the airline industry makes, I think IATA is given a forecast that 24 will be a record year post-COVID when it comes to profits, right? And they're expecting the whole industry, again, I mean, we're talking hundreds of airlines, if not thousands around the world, that in 24 will probably post net profits of, call it 25 billion, right? In comparison, Apple, last year, they posted 100 billion, right? So 4 times as much as the whole combined aviation industry. So I think that's something that people may not be fully aware of, like how difficult is for an airline to get that money. And it's not just about the passenger tickets, right? I mean, passenger ticket is one element, but the amount of costs and the amount of variable things airlines need to face with is perhaps not fully appreciated by the general public.
Oh, very cool. And one last question is, you obviously travel a lot. And so tell us about, a specific segment of a specific journey with, what was the origin, what was the destination, what was the airline, what class were you traveling in, etc. And why was that leg kind of the most memorable for you, right? What's the best segment you've ever traveled on?
Oh, that's an easy one because it was not with an airline. It was actually doing a flight test. So when I was at Bombardier, when I started my career at Bombardier, I was doing avionics integration. So we had to test a new avionics component, a new inertial reference system. And basically it's a very boring test, but it was cool, and I'll explain why. You can only do it in flight. And it's a boring flight because you basically need to do a triangle, basically doing 2 hours, 2 hours, 2 hours. So I got the opportunity I had the opportunity to go into a production business jets. It was a Challenger 605 with the test pilots and myself. It was just the three of us. And the routing was actually, because we were doing it out of the Montreal airport, and just to avoid some paperwork, we didn't want to go into US airspace. So, in Canada, there isn't a lot of places to go if you don't want to go to the US. So we just went north. So I get to do a flight sitting on the back and at sometimes into the jump seat of the cockpit. But I had the aircraft for my own. So I was kind of experiencing a fake business, fully private business experience. And it was also very memorable because we flew up north, in Quebec, and even going into Iqaluit in Nunavut and that area, which is northern Canada, an area you don't usually get to go. So that was very memorable.
Nice,
So
yeah.
for sure, yeah. It was a great experience, yeah.
Yeah, must have been beautiful up there as well. Yeah. Cool.
And just to travel on a business jet, it's a very cool experience. I mean, you do understand why people like business jets.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay, Peter, moving on to the next segment.
Absolutely. Rodrigo, we're about to enter the trivia challenge. So this is an Aeropedia exclusive where we ask each guest a series of questions, trivia questions, in the hopes of eventually naming a AvGeek champion. So,
yeah.
Are you ready?
I am ready, but I gotta tell you, I'm not an av geek, so I'll do my best. Just be nice with me.
Okay.
We'll
see how it goes. I'm sure you'll do fine. If nothing else, it's a good learning experience. So, okay. Your first question, Rodrigo.
Yeah.
It is airplane spotting in nature. So, what is the main visible difference between the ATR and the Dash 8 main landing gear? So these are two turboprop aircraft. What's the difference in their landing gear?
Yeah, so the Dash 8 has the landing gear really like under the wings, which makes them have a super long rotation. But that's an easy one to spot, I think.
All right. Yes, indeed, you are correct. The ATR's landing gear is mounted to the fuselage, and the Dash 8 has theirs mounted on the engine pylon. So very well done. Okay, next question. And this one, for those of our listeners that are just listening in, you might want to switch over to the YouTube channel version because there's going to be a visual aspect of this. This is aircraft equipment related. So this system provides pilots with instrumentation and crew enunciations for aircraft engines and other systems, such as hydraulic, pneumatic, electrical, and control surfaces. And there is a picture of an example of this system. Can you name it?
Yeah, it's one of the pages of the ICAS, isn't it?
Indeed. The ICAS, the Engine Indication and Crew Alerting System, or EICAS, and pronounced ICAS in the industry. Good job. All right, you're on a roll. Okay, number 3, aircraft knowledge. How many emergency exits does or did the MD-80 family have on passenger variants, except the MD-87? So I'll explain a little more why that's excluded, but for the average MD-80, how many emergency exits did it have?
I'm gonna go with 4. I mean, on each side.
4 on each side. All right. You shouldn't have clarified. There are 8 total exits, but they're not all on one
Oh,
side.
there's one at the back. Okay, that
So
that
the
I didn't know.
MD-80 had a very unique emergency exit out the tail cone of the airplane. So that was the 8th. And there was an extra door on the left-hand side. So there were 8 exits, but they're not evenly dispersed on the left and right side. And then the reason I excluded the MD-87 is that that variant was a bit shorter. So it did not have what's labeled here, number 7 on the side. So, all right.
Okay.
We'll give you
Cool.
partial credit for that one. 8 exits. All right. Not everything
Well.
sucks in the world. A lot of good things happen, but there is an airport whose 3-letter identifier is SUX, Sierra Uniform X-ray. Can you name the airport?
No, this is not one of the. No, unless you give me a hint, but honestly, it's not one of the.
Here's a picture. They even advertised on the terminal itself. Fly sucks.
Fly sucks. No.
It is the Sioux City Airport. Sioux City. All right.
Okay.
And number 5 for you, Rodrigo, your last question. This short-lived German airline launched in 2007. It tried to distinguish itself by reintroducing smoking on board in all cabins. So most people that fly today see all the no smoking signs and the prohibition of that. But this airline tried to reverse that and have all smoking all the time. Can you name the airline?
No, I cannot.
Ashwin, you want to take a guess?
Is it the airline that Niki Lauda launched?
Lauda? Yeah,
Was
I
it?
was gonna say. I mean, it was short-lived, that's for sure. But
Short-lived. No,
what?
it's Mint Air. SMINT stood for Smokers International, and then Airways. Fly the difference was there. So they flew between Germany and Japan because they did their market research and saw that the average rate of smoking was higher in those, and so they tried to connect the dots. But apparently it didn't appeal to enough people. So, well done, Rodrigo. You did pretty well.
I did okay. I did okay, but I'll get better. No worries. I'll keep on studying.
Yeah, Rodrigo, you gotta keep tuning into our podcast to get better now, right?
We'll do for sure.
Cool. Well, thanks a lot. That was so, Peter, kudos for making them slightly easier as well. Peter goes deep, right? So this is I feel this is an accomplishment already.
Especially for me, no, like I'm not really an av geek.
No, you're again, you're underplaying your hand. You're better than you think you are, right? So well done. Cool. So Rodrigo, really thanks a lot for being on the podcast. I think this was so insightful, right? We again, airlines buy planes, by the dozens, and the wide body aircraft today are responsible for, connecting different parts of the world, and just they're getting better with every single step change in technology. And you can just tell these days, just as the latest wide bodies of Boeing and Airbus, they're so quiet, they're so fuel efficient, they've opened up point-to-point routes, etc. So really, all the best with what you're doing, and we got to have you back sometime to go deeper into a specific element of Widebody product marketing.
Yeah, no, thank you both, Ashwin and Peter. It was really cool. Hopefully I didn't babble too much, but no, it's just I really enjoy what I do. There's so many things on this, and as I mentioned, even if I'm not an nav geek, I've come to, of course, appreciate, as you said, Ashwin, the importance of the industry. Connecting the world is something that cannot be undone at this point. It needs to be going forward, and it's a very challenging industry for all the parties involved, but it's also a very small industry that we all have the luck to be working in. So thank you again for the invitation, and I'll be happy to follow the next episodes and to be back whenever you need me.
Great. Thank you so much, Rodrigo.
Awesome. Thanks. Thanks for joining us today, and feel free to subscribe and like our podcast at the Aeroscope Aviation channel on YouTube, or the audio version through your favorite podcast feed.
Also, give us any feedback on topics you'd like to hear or ways we can improve the podcast. Visit our Podbean site, aeropedia.podbean.com. See you on the next leg of our journey.